Hello. The system here is telling me that I should be live and live on this channel for the very first time. So it is probably a good chance to just say that yes, this is the first run of one of these live streams. Hopefully, a new series of live streams here on the Ben Sports Story YouTube channel. So there might be a few technical gremlins. We might still be figuring a few things out, but hopefully, as we move through the 25-26 season, which kicks off, the EFL season at least kicks off tonight for Chesterfield, of course, who are typically the main focus of things on this channel. It kicks off tomorrow, hence this live stream today, but the season is back and a new opportunity and chance to get some content out there is back alongside that as well. And as I say, as part of that, we're going to try these live streams. I'm thinking kind of the day before a game, typically 24 hours so thinking this kind of Friday 3 o'clock slot, 24 hours before the typical Saturday 3 o'clock kickoff time, of course, for the midweek games. And if there's any alterations in the calendar, which of course there is quite a few now with the increased coverage by Sky Sports over the past couple of seasons, might have to figure things out as we go there. But as if these Saturday games, I'm thinking 3 o'clock, 24 hours before the game. It's a nice chance. Most of the news is in, most of the team news is in, most of the insight is in terms of pre-match stuff. So that's a nice slot to sit down, have a look at the game, have a look at what to expect from things, particularly from a Chesterfield perspective, of course. And today, of course, it is a particularly good time to be doing that because it is the start of a brand new season, as we've already said. So plenty to discuss, plenty to think about, and obviously we should hopefully over the next few weeks get a few more answers to some questions. But now is quite a fun time because you can kind of things are more open to speculation in terms of how things look, how teams might fare, etc. Just before we move into kind of the main bulk of this live stream, thank you for all the support on content elsewhere. As I say, it's about a month or so since there's been any content on this channel, any videos, but there has been stuff elsewhere, particularly over on Medium. We've done some pieces on Chesterfield's new signings and also a little tactical piece, particularly on Dylan Duffy, who was one of the standout players, I would say, of pre-season. That is certainly something that we will bear in mind heading into this video. And in terms of what this kind of live stream is going to kind of lost for words, as I say, doing things live. We're in kind of uncharted territory, so it might be a little bit choppy for the first couple of runs. But hopefully, as we say, as we move through the pre-season, and also I am looking for a name for this series, something to do with the fact that it's kind of 24 hours, the last day before the game, something along that. So, if there's any ideas, feel free to pop them in the live chat or down in the comments if you watch this back at a later date. Right now, I'm just kind of pinning it as a preview stream, but it would be nice if we're going to make this a series on the channel to have a more central name for things. So that's something we're looking out for. But yes, it's been a while since any content here on the channel. But as I say, if you've seen anything elsewhere, then also feel free to go and check that out if you haven't seen it, should I say. And all the links should be, hopefully, if I set everything up properly, be down in the description to things like Medium and Blue Sky and Twitter and TikTok and all of those relevant places. That was a lot of admin, as we say, for first run to get things out of the way. So what is the plan for the next kind of half hour or so? Well, we're going to take a look back over Chesterfield's pre-season. Of course, I did do in that most recent video kind of offered a few predictions in terms of what we might see for Chesterfield over the coming weeks. So I'll look at kind of what has come to fruition in that regard, what maybe hasn't come to fruition quite as much where that's concerned, where Chesterfield are at. And then we're also going to take a look a little bit at Barrow as well. Spent last night having a look at things in that regard as to how Barrow might look, what kind of test they might provide for Chesterfield going forward. So we'll have a look at all that very, very shortly. I've got a nice little kind of PowerPoint presentation prepared for that. So hopefully, again, that's all set up properly and we can have a look through that going forward. So yeah, that is certainly the plan ahead for the next kind of hour or so, well, half hour, I would say probably. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this. If I can display this properly. There we are. I got a little bit further forward there. Actually, that's it. Because that was just kind of a holding screen. So yeah, looking ahead to this Barrow game. An interesting one for Chesterfield. And as I say, before we move on into the here and now, we're going to take a look back at kind of a few things that I pinned. Hopefully, that is readable for you. I'm not quite sure how big how big this will display, but if it's not, that's not a massive issue, because like I say, I'll probably be reading these things. They are kind of there as a kind of additional visual aid rather than a centerpiece. So as we rounded things off, as I say there, the last piece of content here on the channel was that video at the start of July, before any preseason games have been played. I thought that was a nice chance to throw some final thoughts out there that I had heading into preseason. Then we'd sit back down before any competitive games were played and have another look here. And that is what we shall be doing at this moment in time. And I kind of put through some ideas of what I thought Chesterfield, based on their early signings and what some of those players could offer. I had a quick look through at what some of those players could offer for Chesterfield, and how that might kind of combine together to make the team. And this was something that I pitched as a potential kind of in possession lineup for the Spartans. So yes, it looks a little bit attacking. Obviously, it will be we expect at least a 4-2-3-1 for Chesterfield, as it always tends to be from Paul Cook, and always really has been, with some occasional exceptions thrown in there. It's been a 4-2-3-1 for the vast majority of both Paul Cook's career and his career in the Chesterfield dugout. So that's what we're expecting. But in possession, thought they might, as we say, form this in possession back three. We've got Tom Naylor in there. And the asterisk players on this list is something that we'll talk about in a little bit, because these were the players that I kind of analysed as maybe some areas where Chesterfield could look to recruit over the month of July. And in some places, they certainly did that. And that's something we'll talk about going forward. But as we see, the two fullbacks here in Daly, Campbell and Lewis, nice and high. And then kind of that in possession back three of Naylor, Dunkley, McFadden, Markande and Dobra, the right winger and the left winger, really tucking in really deep, and also tucking in quite narrow, and then also dropping really deep as well, to allow them to get on the ball. And then something we spoke about really was maybe having a second striker type to act as an additional pinner on that deepest line, and give Markande and Dobra the space to drop deep, pick up the ball, and drive forward. Now, one player we kind of pitched for that in that initial video is Paddy Madden. Now, we haven't really seen a great deal of him at all in preseason. In fact, unless my memory is escaping me, we haven't seen him at all in preseason. He has now returned to training and looks to be a part of the group, but has not been up to this point. So that's something maybe to keep a little bit of an eye on. And one area where, kind of with the benefit of hindsight, we can maybe say that something else will be happening. And that kind of links to one of the pieces, the medium pieces that I referenced back at the start of this stream, concerning Dylan Duffy, because he has been the player that's kind of emerged in that second strike role, which is interesting, because when he's played for Chesterfield before, he's typically played a little bit wider out on the left wing. So it's been a really interesting pre-season for him, because he's kind of been operating in this left-hand half space and kind of acting as that additional pinner, and then of course kind of drifting wide and demonstrating some more of that usual wing play that you would see from him. But he has been the player that's taken almost this second striker mantle, if you like, alongside either Will Grigg or Lee Bonis, where there is certainly definitely a debate to be had there. I had Grigg pitched as my starter, even with Bonis through the door by the time that that video, the most recent video, was made around a month ago. Now, I had Grigg pinned as the starter, and up until the last pre-season game against Sheffield United, I was still relatively confident that was going to be the case. But there was a little bit of a curveball thrown in there from Paul Cook, deciding to start Bonis for that final pre-season game. He scored. He had one disallowed for offside on what was quite a tough day. Of course, Sheffield United winning by 4-1. He was very, very active. And he really kind of threw his, and has done throughout pre-season, to be fair. Both have been amongst the goals throughout the pre-season calendar. So he's really thrown his name in there. And I do wonder whether it could be Bonis that starts. But we'll get into some more kind of final concluding thoughts around what we could see a little bit later in the live stream. That's certainly something to keep an eye on. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward. And as we said, just to kind of round off what we had on this screen here, a lot of it has kind of, I would say the shape has come to fruition, in that it is quite a similar shape that Chesterfield have been playing to the one in possession, at least, that wondered if they might at the start of pre-season. However, there are some maybe personnel differences, of course, there. We've got Adam Lewis pitched as the starter. Now, again, Cook could throw another curveball and decide to start him at home against Barrow tomorrow, but that has not been typically, when you're looking at the bits of pre-season where Chesterfield have played their first 11, if you like. That has not really been the case. It is tended to be Lewis Gordon that's got the nod there and got kind of a greater share of the minutes during pre-season. So that's maybe one of those personnel changes. As we said, we've discussed the other one really in Dylan Duffy's emergence as the second striker, and Paddy Madden, of course, having some injury problems. Maybe he could still break his way into the team, depending on how the rest of the transfer window goes, etc., and play a role in that position. But at the moment, you would imagine with how preseason has gone, that Duffy would start there. Other than that, it is, and again, of course, as we just discussed there, the kind of running battle between Grigg and Bonis for that spot up front. So before we move on to from where we left off to where we are now, really, I just wanted to talk about those asterisk players, because I finished off that last video by offering some suggestions of where Chesterfield could look to recruit, and a couple of them actually have ended up happening. So we'll start with the right back, and it's kind of good news and bad news from a Chesterfield point of view, really. Good news is, yes, they did recruit there. Looked like they need one more body in there. Vontae Daly-Campbell, I think, on the whole, has had a really good preseason and maybe kind of reasserted himself into Chesterfield squad, because although he was kept on and given a new contract, I think there was a feeling that maybe as the summer moved on that he could maybe move on, but he really has fought his way back into contention, and due to what we're about to discuss in a minute, will probably be the starter for this opening game of the League Two season. Because yes, it's good news in the sense that they brought Devon Tanton back to the club. I think he was the perfect kind of profile for what they're looking for in their fullbacks. Very attacking, very comfortable on the ball, and of course getting forward and getting crosses into the box, which is what we said could be kind of the blueprint for Chesterfield. Getting the ball to Markande and Dobra, getting them on the half turn, then quickly shifting the ball out and then whipping the crosses in. I think Tanton was absolutely perfect for that. Bad news is the injury problems that kind of plagued him last season have unfortunately struck again, and he is now out, having picked up an ankle injury at Alfreton Town in what sounds like very innocuous circumstances. And you do have to feel for Tanton, really, because yes, he struggled with injuries for a long time, but I think not only to get injured again and be out for what sounds like it's going to be a couple of months, but to get injured in really bizarre and unfortunate fashion is a real shame. For him, and obviously you kind of feel for him in that regard. So that's what's happening at right back. The other position where we kind of pitched they could recruit is in this kind of second of the two pivot players, because I think Ryan Stirk, it was a pretty bold statement to go out. Of course, Chesterfield lost to Walsall in the playoff final last season. Playoff semi-final, should I say, and then Walsall going on to lose in the final, of course. I think going out there and taking one of their midfielders from them was a pretty big statement, and I don't think he was coming to Chesterfield to sit on the bench. So I think that one was pretty nailed. Then we spoke about kind of who could partner Stirk and what kind of role they could play, whether they could kind of drop in and form this in possession back three, allowing the two fullbacks to get really high and be really aggressive in an attacking sense. And we kind of pitched that Tom Naylor could maybe do that. Of course, he has played at centre-back before, so dropping into the defensive line is not something that's particularly new to him. He also does have that kind of box-to-box quality when in midfield, so he could be capable of making these kind of bursting runs off the edge, if you like, of the back three, and adding an additional dynamic and an additional potential kind of avenue for rotations for Chesterfield in their attacking unit. But we did say that maybe that wasn't the best fit. I think actually I rounded off by saying in that video there was one player who at the time was linked to Chesterfield that I really wanted them to get, having watched him a little bit, and that was Matt Dibley-Diaz, and he is at Chesterfield, and thankfully, despite, again, like his fellow Fulham loanee Devon Tanton, picking up a bit of an injury problem in pre-season, does sound like he's back in contention for the start. I think that could be absolutely massive for Chesterfield. He's back in training, at least. Whether he could play the game, it's a tough one, because, of course, he did miss the latter end of pre-season, but he didn't miss the entirety of pre-season. He did get a decent chunk of minutes under his belt, so he won't be entirely rusty and kind of operating from a dry start. So he should at least have some fitness there. So you'd think he could be in contention, having returned to training earlier this week. So Dibley-Diaz, very good signing, as we say, for that kind of midfielder dropping into the defensive line, if that makes sense, in an in-possession state. And there's also another player that could probably do that as well that's been bought in. The man formerly known as Trialist, Luke Butterfield, coming in, released by Everton, had a few games on trial for Chesterfield, was very, very impressive and earned himself a contract. And I think he and Dibley-Diaz could be a nice rotation for them. Then, of course, if you want that little bit more experience, you could also bring Naylor in. But I think Tom Naylor, a bit like Liam Mandeville, really is a kind of player that is actually really handy to have on the bench, because it gives you great flexibility to change things up, because they're capable of dropping in and playing in 3 or 4 different positions or roles in the team. So I think that could be where we see Tom Naylor this season, maybe in a little bit more of a backup role than we've seen in the first 2 years, allowing those younger players to flourish. But of course, if his experience is there, which I'm sure it will be needed at times this season, it is a nice thing to have. Now, that's the past. We can now move in, to the slightly more recent past, at least, and start moving towards the present, because this was the most recent starting 11 for Chesterfield. As we say, not a great deal of change, but some personnel changes in there. As we say, Gordon for Lewis, Duffy for Madden, Bonus for Grigg. But a lot of the core of what we expected and what I kind of pitched at the start of preseason has been there. Of course, it's probably a slightly different shape with John Fleck starting. He's another player maybe to consider who could be in contention. He's the player that's picked up the minutes off Dibley Diaz during that injury, really. But I just think that Dibley Diaz offers a slightly... I wouldn't say John Fleck and Ryan Stirk are the same in a profile sense in that pivot, but I'm not sure they're different enough to be kind of a complementary, to a truly complementary partnership. Whereas I think if you went for Dibley Diaz and Stirk or Butterfield and Stirk, that would be a little bit more of the case. So if Dibley Diaz is fit, I wouldn't be surprised to see him start, but equally I wouldn't be surprised if they stuck with Fleck either. That's one that's probably a little bit up in the air as we move through to look at this Barrow game. But just before we do, of course, just a look at the final preseason lineup for Chesterfield there. And as we say, we kind of discussed most of it on that most recent slide, actually, but I did just think I'd throw this up here just to visualize it a little bit. And that this, you would imagine, will be very close to the team that Chesterfield put out on Saturday. So we've discussed how things are looking for Chesterfield, and now I think it only makes sense really to have a look at how Barrow are shaping up. We've got a little bit of an opposition report here, and the game that we've chosen to focus on in particular was their friendly against Bolton a couple of weeks ago. Of course, Bolton Wanderers of League One, Barrow, of course, in League Two, taking on Chesterfield on Saturday. And chose this game because very thankfully there was a live stream of the whole game up on YouTube from Bolton's point of view. So I decided to have a watch over that last night, and kind of here are a condensation of kind of the main takeaways from that. And it looks like Andy Wing's side are going to be setting up with a back three this season in kind of a 3-5-2, 5-3-2, 3-1-4-2. There's many different ways you could probably categorize it. Just for kind of the easy basics of understanding, we're going to call it a 5-3-2, I think, but of course with those two wing backs, which will be tasked in getting forward and providing some attacking support when they are looking to get forward, and just below that, really, it is a demonstration, really, of the kind of out of possession shape from Barrow, kind of highlighting that 5-3-2. I couldn't really get, because of obviously kind of camera angles and stuff, I couldn't really get an ideal screenshot of the entire team in that shape, but I think this does provide an adequate representation, because you've got the two strikers in, I think it was Tyler Walker and Kane Hemmings, who's on trial now, has subsequently signed and will be a part, you would imagine, of Barrow's squad for Saturday's game. Staying quite narrow when it comes to this, probably looking to protect the middle of the pitch. I think it was Josh Sheen, of course, an incredible technical dictator for Bolton, probably looking to deprive him of the ball. Staying quite narrow, and then you've got the three midfielders there, kind of, as you can see, in that 5-3-2 shape. They're probably, again, forming kind of that batch of five around the middle, but then looking to press out. So as we say, that's kind of what we're expecting from Barrow, a 3-5-2/5-3-2. A lot of numbers there, a bit of a tongue twister. 3-5-2/5-3-2 shape from them. And then that probably falls back more firmly into a 5-3-2 when they are without the ball. And then just to kind of illustrate that a little bit further, another illustration of their starting 11. Again, a few personnel changes in there. Innes Cameron, who is another striker that they've signed over the summer, I believe, has come in. They've bought in Regan Booty, another player that's come in from Gateshead, a player that Chesterfield will know quite well because he was knocking around the National League for a decent chunk of their time. Well, they were there, particularly probably most memorably for Gateshead. So, again, a few personnel changes, but as we say, we've got a good idea of how these teams should play. And for Barrow, that does look like it's going to be that 3-5-2/5-3-2. And now, this is where we talk about the game. We've kind of looked briefly into the background of both sides. Now we can have a look at how it might blend together as we move on to this next slide now. And yes, it is there. As we say, we've put kind of the two potential starting 11s together. For Barrow, I kind of have to confess here that that's obviously not my primary area of expertise. So I just went with the most recent 11 from their friendly match. But again, the personnel here aren't the massive kind of focus here. It's more on the overall kind of shape of both sides and how that might influence how the game plays out. So for Barrow, I just went for their most recent starting 11. For Chesterfield, I have made one change from that Sheffield United game and put Dibley Diaz back in there. But again, it could well be John Flake. But the reason I put Dibley Diaz in there is because this illustrates, I think, what the game plan could be and arguably should be for Chesterfield going forward. Because as you can see there, it's that 5-3-2 shape from Barrow, of course, represented in the white, and Chesterfield in the blue. And just before we delve into this, just in case you wonder why we're kind of representing it as a Chesterfield in possession versus Barrow out of possession battle, I just don't think that's a particularly unfair assumption to think that the game is likely to play out in that manner. You look at the two games Chesterfield played against Barrow last season under two different managers with two probably different styles of play in Stephen Clements and in Andy Wing. In both games, Chesterfield had 65% plus of the ball. It was at least 60. I think it was over 65 in both games. And Chesterfield tend to dominate the ball in most games, really, but particularly at home. So I don't think it's unfair to say that is probably going to be the pattern of the game, and therefore probably warrants the most consideration when we talk about how this game is likely to play out. So we've got Chesterfield set up in that in possession with that kind of back three, if you like, with the fullbacks not pushed right on, particularly with Lewis Gordon playing. I don't think they'll be pushed right on, but they'll certainly be tasked with providing that little bit of width, which then allows Dylan Duffy to play that little bit further in the field, almost as the second striker. And then, of course, Markande and Dobra dropping that a little bit deeper to pick the ball up on the half turn, drive forward. So that's why we've got it set up as it is. Now, onto kind of the pattern of the game and where I think the game could be kind of won and lost from a Chesterfield point of view, particularly won when we're talking about their attacking play. And having watched Bolton and what they like to do, again, another team that are very, very good on the ball under Steven Schumacher. So there's some nice symmetry there to try and kind of work out how this game is going to play out. I think the thing for Chesterfield is how they kind of bring Barrow out of this 5-3-2 shape and how they recognize that, how they recognize who is shifting, who is pressing, and how they then manipulate the space that is left as these players push out. Because if you look, as we've said, at that kind of that striker pairing, if it indeed is going to be a front two for Barrow, which it looks like it is, they were playing maybe a little bit more of a 3-4-3 with kind of another body in behind the striker at the start of pre-season. But as it's moved through pre-season, a lot of it does look like it's going to be a two up top. And they do stay quite narrow in and out of possession basis, probably to protect the middle of the pitch, to stop, as we say, the ball getting into that central kind of deepest midfielder, the kind of dictator in the middle. Stop them kind of running the game and being able to receive the ball through the lines. But what that then opens up, particularly if you do drop, as we're saying here, drop Dibley Diaz out of the midfield into that line and perform that little bit of a back three. Not only does that offer you a bit more solidity in a defensive sense, it also presents Barrow with a little bit of a dilemma, because if they are going to tell the strikers to stay narrow and to stop the balls into the middle, it then opens up the question of who is going to do the pressing out wide, who is going to press Dibley Diaz on the right hand side. McFadden, who we're saying in the absence of any recruiting done by Chesterfield, because that was the third and final, you probably spotted it, asterisk position that I said at the start of pre-season. Could they look to recruit there? They haven't as of yet, but I still, again, wouldn't be massively surprised if they look to recruit there before the window closes at the end of this month. Of course, we're now moving into the month of August today, actually. So, yeah, with Dibley Diaz on the right, McFadden on the left. There's a dilemma there for Barrow, I think, in terms of who picks up the responsibility of pressing those players. I think it's going to be down to Chesterfield to kind of look, because there's probably, there's three ways really that Barrow could deal with this, but we'll look at the first two for now, because these are the kind of main bulk of the conversation. It'll probably either be that one of those two kind of more advanced central midfielders, if you like, one of the kind of number 8 midfielders will have to push out and press Dibley Diaz or McFadden, or it will be one of the wing backs that has to step up. And I think the key for Chesterfield is going to be recognizing which player is pressing and then looking at where they want to play, if that makes sense. So we'll kind of run both scenarios now. So say Dibley Diaz gets on the ball and it's Raheem Harper there that presses. That will then probably cause Barrow's midfield to shift over. And what that probably presents you with is a 1v1 for both Dylan Markande and Armando Dobra, which is exactly what you want. So the key there is probably going to be for the likes of Diaz, and then, of course, if the same situation emerges on the other side for Cal McFadden, to be brave in their passing and look to play those balls through, look to get the ball to Markande and Dobra, because then once they've got that 1v1, and of course, there is a transitional moment there because Barrow are going to have to shift if they're shifting over to one side, kind of pushing one of those midfielders off the side of the midfield three. There's going to be a chance there to play that ball. They're going to have to play quickly, play forwards, and then allow them to get on the half turn and really play and then really drive through. So then that's one thing that you would like to see from Chesterfield. And I think in Diaz and McFadden, they've got two players that are capable of doing that, because Cal McFadden, yes, he is experienced, maybe not got a massive amount of pace about him, but he always looks a pretty composed character on the ball. And Diaz, of course, is a midfielder anyway, kind of dropping into that line to receive the ball. So you would expect him to be more than capable of that. So Diaz, I think, would be the one you want to run the game through, really. And I think whether it's Diaz, whether it's Fleck, whether it's Butterfield, potentially, one of those three would probably be the players that you want to be kind of running that in that sense. But also, if you do want to go out through the other side, I think Cal McFadden could handle that responsibility on the ball as well. So that's one way. And then now I suppose that presents the other scenario where there's a press forward from either the right wing back or the left wing back, because it wasn't kind of 100% one way in that game that I watched against Bolton. Barrow kind of probably testing things out in pre-season, which is what it's there for. There was a bit of both, really. Sometimes the midfielder would go to press the extra man. Sometimes it would be the wing back. And when it was the wing back, what Bolton tended to do then, I think what Chesterfield would be very wise to try and replicate, is then knocking the ball into the channel. Because if the wing back has pressed, then the centre back has probably got to move out, and it's presenting that space there for probably a ball down the line for bonus for Duffy, depending on which side of the pitch the play is going down. Probably presents them with the chance to get 1v1 with that centre-back, to try and roll them, to try and kind of drop into that channel area. Again, this is why I'm leaning towards Bonus over Grigg, actually, in this game. Not only because Bonus has competed very well in pre-season, not only because he started the last pre-season friendly and scored and had one disallowed for offside, but because he's very, very good at getting almost on a defender's blind side. And I think there's really a chance to do that with how these players are going to move, because the Barrow defenders, particularly their outside centre-backs, are going to be having an eye on whether the wing-back is stepping up, and then if they have to step up with it. So you can probably creep on the back shoulder, because their intention is going to be on what's happening in front. They can probably creep on the back shoulder, drop the ball into the channel, and that's where Bonus and Duffy can drag the team up the pitch, and then you've got the supplementary ones from Markande and Dobra and the two fullbacks to support that. So again, just to round off the thought there for Chesterfield, I think the big key is kind of identifying who it is that's pressing these two outside players in Diaz and McFadden, where the extra man is coming from a Barrow perspective, and then looking to play in to the space that they vacate, or if not directly vacate, that they open up from the shifts that have to occur amongst the rest of the team. So that's about it, I would say, from a Chesterfield perspective. Of course, the third and final scenario to address is, what if Barrow just choose to sit deep? What if they don't press out? Or what if they say, you know what, we're fine. We know we've got a lot of good attacking players. We're going to sit off. You can have the ball in those kind of wide areas. Diaz and McFadden can sit on the ball. We're just not going to open up. And that is where the game comes down to what it pretty often does, because tactics can only win you so much. You've got to win your 1v1s, and that's where you're probably gonna have to have that neat into play from the likes of Markande and Dobra, the one-touch football, the kind of football in tight spaces to get through that spaces, and of course unpacking the low block has been a little bit of a problem for Chesterfield in some home games with the amount of draws they had last season, but it's a problem for most teams, really, that come up against it. It's the hardest thing to play against from an attacking point of view, with a lot of players behind the ball. It will probably come down to some nice rotations in those wide areas. You've got those kind of wide triangles, really, in Daly, Campbell, Markande, and Bonus on the right, Duffy, Dobra, and Gordon on the left. You could probably even, if you were being ultra aggressive, if Barrow points really sit in and aren't leaving many players forward at all, you could almost really make it a bit of a four-man rotation, really, and bring those outside players in the three, which again, I think is why dropping one of the midfielders and going to an in-possession three could really work, because then it gives you an extra player to release off the side. And again, gives you kind of almost a four-man rotation on two sides, and getting those rotations going quickly, shifting the ball between those players. That's probably how you're going to have to unpack it if Barrow do say, no, we're not going to press at all. We're just going to sit in this 5-3-2 block. We're going to sit deep. We're going to let you have the ball in those wider areas because you can't hurt us from there, or we don't think you can hurt us from there, or we think it's more difficult for you to hurt us from there at the very least. So yeah, three different kind of scenarios for Chesterfield, but I think there is a way where you can unpack all of them. And that kind of comes round as we kind of move off that screen now and just back to me. Hello. As we round things off, I think that's my conclusion for this game. With the greatest respect to Barrow, that they are not a bad side at all. In fact, I've been largely impressed with the work Andy Wing has done since he went in there. But I think Chesterfield, there are a lot of people's favourites for the league. And if not, they are very few people I've seen kind of in this industry that have done kind of prediction pieces, whether it's video form, written form, whatever, have Chesterfield finishing outside of the top three. Not many have Barrow finishing that high. So I think it is one of those where if Chesterfield execute their game plan well, it is the game they should expect to win. In terms of, because we've spoken about it almost as if kind of Chesterfield attack versus Barrow defense, just because again, history dictates that that's probably how the game is going to pan out. But to look at it from another way, I think this is the kind of game where Trey Dunkley and Cal McFadden, I think, will relish this kind of battle. Because again, I know that this Bolton game is only one game. It's only pre-season. It's against a team from a higher level, but it probably suggests how Barrow might look to approach things in a game where they're not necessarily as fancied. And in that game, it was quite a bit of direct play from Barrow, and I think really that suits kind of Dunkley and McFadden down to the ground. The only place where you worry a little bit is if Barrow managed to knock the ball into some wider areas and get players running at them over the ground. That's probably where Barrow will look to hurt Chesterfield and where they could have any potential success on the attack. But again, I think my general kind of conclusion here is if Chesterfield's players and they play as a unit as well as they can play, or people imagine they will play this season. Of course, it's still a new team in some parts, but if they play as well as build, this should be a game where they can get a positive result. It's at home. It's the opening day. It would be It would be a good one for them to get a result, and I think I fancy them to do that. I'm going to stop short of issuing an official prediction because that's a slippery slope. Once you put something on the internet, it's there forever, and people are more than happy to remind you if you get something wrong. So I've already probably put my neck on the line a little bit by saying that I fancy Chesterfield for this game, but I'm not going to kind of lock that in as an official prediction or give a scoreline for that reason. But on that note, before I get myself in any more hot water, that is going to be the end of this very first live stream. Clocking in just over half now. As I say, my voice is now starting to get a little bit raspy, so I'm actually, hopefully this doesn't confuse the mic too much. I'm actually going to take a little drink of water. In fact, I'm going to mute myself. Thank you very much. As I say, this is still very much a work in progress, new for me in terms of presenting for this length of time without any edits or kind of stopping or particularly doing it live. In terms of some of the technical elements as well, I'll have a look back over the stream, see how well they worked, see whether the kind of graphics that we had on screen review buses is very much a work in progress, but do stick with us because I would like to have this as a bit of a weekly show, or potentially even more than that. But particularly when there's a Saturday 3 o'clock kickoff, I think Friday 3 o'clock, 24 hours before, we'll get the party started and looking ahead to the game with one of these live streams. So I hope I can count on you to be here. If not, that's fine. Of course, very, very busy, and it is the middle of the day. People have got plenty of things to be doing this time on a Friday afternoon, but these streams will be over on YouTube to watch back if you should wish to do so. And of course, if you can leave any feedback on how this was. But again, do bear in mind this was a trial run, and hopefully as we move through this season, they'll get better and better. But thank you very much for those that have joined. It's been massively, massively appreciated. And as I say, hopefully, actually, next week will be a little bit different for me personally. But going through the season, there should be definitely more of these to come. So thank you very, very much for joining me. Looking forward to the EFL season getting going again. Of course, there's a game between Luton and AFC Wimbledon tonight, but for Chesterfield, which is the main focus as we say on this channel, it all starts tomorrow, and I cannot wait. It should be a very, very good season, and if Chesterfield can match the wide expectations of them, it could be a very, very special one. So yes, that is it. Thank you very, very much. Hopefully, as I say, there should be some more content. I've got some more ideas for maybe some more a little bit of a teaser to end things off on. If you made it this far, you deserve that. A little bit of a teaser. I'm hoping to get a new kind of written series out towards the start of the week as well. But more on that after this game is done. Let's go and enjoy that first, see what happens, and then we'll meet back here at some point next week to dissect it all. But yes, for now, that is it. Thank you very, very much. One last time, if you could offer any support, like, shares, subscription, that'd be massively, massively appreciated. Let's say, see you very, very soon. Thank you once more, and goodbye.